Do I need to run a full marathon, either in training or as a race, before my first Ironman? It's a question I get asked a hell of a lot by my first timers. Today, if you're interested, we're going to go through some pros, some mainly cons of putting your body through that. If you're interested, tune in and we'll cover why and why not. The benefits, the cost to the body, and is it really necessary? Hit the follow, watch some of my other videos as well if you're interested in nutrition, fueling, how to build a training plan, heat training, you name it. Hope you like my new glasses, fresh off the boat today, trying them out, feedback welcome. Something a lot of my athletes that have only started working with me perhaps in the first year feel that they might need to do a spring marathon, certainly in the Northern Hemisphere, in order to then do a summer Ironman. Various reasons. They feel they need to do the distance, they feel they need to suffer for 3.5, 4.5 hours so they know what it feels like. Same on the bike, they feel they need to ride the distance and of course the swim independently, so then when you come to race day it's all done individually and you just put it together. As with anything, context is key. There's pros and cons to most of that. The quick answer is no. The short, if you just wanted to tune in for a couple of minutes today. It's mainly cons, guys. The recovery from running, let's say 3 to 4.5 hours at that intensity for a marathon distance, 42 kilometers, normally on hard tarmac. The time on your feet, the corrosive nature of going much harder than you would normally do in a long, steady run, and also a marathon after a bike in an Ironman is a completely different experience. And actually, it's been said by many that it's easier on the body, and more of that to come. So the recovery on that's going to take you 2 to 3 weeks. Yes, you can still train, you can still bike, you can still swim, but the negative influence of the corrosive nature of the high TSS strain, the muscle damage of the eccentric forces. Eccentric is slowing down a muscle, so if that's concentric, eccentric is the deceleration of mainly your quads, of course, and your calves. The risk of injury, of course, goes high due to the nature of 42 kilometers. You could argue with me that you do it as you were doing a training run anyway, and your program said 3 hours. Okay. So any triathlete that runs a fresh marathon in 3 hours time duration is a pretty good triathlete. 4:15 a K. There's no ways that your long run pace, if you had 3 hours in the training plan, would be at 4:15 a K pace. It'll probably be about 4:45 to 5:15 a kilometer. So there's different ways of doing it. If you had, I wouldn't ever prescribe longer than probably 3 to 3.5 hours in a long run, normally about 20 miles, okay? So if you know you can do 20 miles and you're a conditioned athlete, it's not your first time, or you've got a lot of marathon experience. This is how people get into Ironman as well. They run 3, 4, 5 marathons and then they sign up for an Ironman. If you know you can run 20 miles or 32 kilometers fairly regularly, once or twice a month, so your body's conditioned, and that takes you around 3 hours to do, probably in a long, steady run, you could argue that you could do a marathon as part of the training, but pull out. But then what's the point of entering a race where you could go and do that amount of time? The next con is the disruption. You can see this is getting a bit longer, to consistency. Due to you'll naturally run a bit more for maybe 5 times a week because you think you have to log in a certain amount of miles, but the recovery 2 to 3 weeks to properly recover. They generally, rule of thumb, it's a hard marathon is sort of a mile a day for every mile raced. So if it's a 5-mile race, it's 5 days. I mean, it's not my rule. It's just something we've kind of heard over the years that might be pertinent to endurance training and racing. So especially when you're older. So if you're in your 40s and you're listening to this and you're deciding to run a marathon, it's really a bad idea, is what I'm getting at. If the timing is towards the end of the year, autumn, and you're only looking to do an Ironman the next year, absolutely, because it'll give you a goal through the late end of summer into autumn. It'll hit winter with a really good base, and then you can build some speed on that period of training in the winter, and then of course move into spring and carry that over. So that's not a bad idea. So timing is everything, as we know. So I would not do it in spring. And we would maybe do it at the end of the season if you really want to do one, because there are some nice autumnal ones in the Northern Hemisphere, which then springboards you towards Christmas. I have no problem with that. The biggest thing is exactly what I've mentioned straight from the beginning. The fact that you can do the distance doesn't mean that come race day, it's going to feel exactly the same in an Ironman. I mentioned one of my earlier videos in the top 10 mistakes or top 10 Ironman tips for beginners is if you can focus on at least doing 3/4 of the distance for each individual discipline, swim being easier to complete because it's obviously less load and you're in a pool, and it's most of the time it's quite easy to swim about 3 kilometers. For most people, the bike, about 140 kilometers, also manageable. Outside, you don't have to do the full 180, but with the marathon, I probably would not go over this amount of time. The muscle damage from all the breakdown of muscle tissue is far too high, which will then carry over to your swim fatigue and the chance of injury. I just wanted to clear that up because I get asked that multiple times. I'm also going to go into some ideas around how you could manage that in a second if this is too late and you're definitely doing that. You've entered a marathon and you're going to take it easy. So hold on for a sec. I hope that gave you some thought initially in the part 1. Part 2, we're going to touch on a few whys, perhaps, because you might not agree with me. I really feel there's no requirement to physically complete 42 kilometers for your validation to do an Ironman. No, definitely not at all. You've got better use of time, and that the most important thing, if you are worried that your body hasn't been there before, you have a point. I'd rather you get the time on your feet, so that would mean hiking, walking, perhaps for 4 to 5 hours duration. So you spend the time on your feet carrying fluids, getting quite fatigued. There's some merit in that because there's loading and really good specific conditioning in the heels, for example, but make sure it's on soft terrain. You're not running to time and your watch and checking GPS. You're absolutely just using this metric to make use of conditioning for your body. There's difference there. So you're not actually running a marathon per se. You might cover 35 kilometers in that 4.5 hours, but you're walking, you're running, you're fueling. There's a lot of merit to that. The increase in stress and the damage to the body far outweighs the gains you're going to get from actually doing that. So my advice is to not run a full run marathon. You'll thank me. If you've entered one and you're watching this because you're intrigued, I suppose this is what I'll tell people. You've got to be really strict, which is hard, to have confidence and patience to hold back, run to a low heart rate. People that normally beat you maybe will finish ahead and go, oh, are you okay? You're a bit slower. You've got to run slow. Now, running slow means if your best is 4 hours, running slow might be 5 hours. And then you start to come back to, is that really worth my use of time and the muscle damage going into that? You could consider a walk-run approach, something that I do with my much older athletes. I get them to run 10Ks or around about an hour. and then they'll walk for 2 minutes. So they get to take on nutrition because a lot of them struggle to take on fuel while they're running. They spill a lot, or their breathing and their eating isn't as good as some of us might be in a race. They walk for 2 minutes, they reset, so you use a different stride length, different muscle recruitment. You get a mental reset. It's easier to break a marathon up into 4 10K runs, so 4 by 1 hours, for example, or 1 hour 10. So you preserve the body. That's one way I probably would do it, and I might get, depending on how close to the event their main goal is. You see, it's very individual. You could pull out early. I know most of you probably wouldn't want to do that, but for the cost of a marathon, 30 to 40 pounds, dollars, maybe 50 to 60, you get to try out your nutrition strategy with aid stations and motivation. So people there around you chatting. It's actually quite nice. Or you could help pace a friend with an asterisk there. Remember, running very slow is actually quite hard. You'll start going up and down your vertical oscillation because you're trying to alter your stride length. You get really tired. If I go and, it's one thing running with a friend, so you're running ideally at a slower pace or pacing them through a 3:30, for example. It's still quite stressful. I've done a little bit of pacing for a blind runner. We're going back 10, 12 years. And he was actually very quick. He was a low 3-hour marathon runner. And I had to just help get through aid stations and move people. And that was pretty stressful. And I was much younger, but it definitely was quite sore still from doing that method there. So you could help pace a friend, but you could always also pull out early if you pace them. It's a nice feeling to have because there's no pressure to do a certain distance or chase a time. So that is one way to consider out of those 4. Okay, so guys and girls listening, in summary, let's look at the timing to event. I think that's crucial. If you're within 12 weeks to your main race, I would definitely consider. No, okay. Your history of running. As I said a few minutes ago, quite a lot of us come into Ironman because of the next challenge, and we've got quite a lot of history in running marathons. So it might not take as much out of you as I'm alluding. You just need to ask yourself the other sports and the priority. So make the most important thing the most important thing. So if you know that swimming that distance is going to be very hard because you're very new to it, you need to devote more time in the water. Running marathons is going to absolutely smash you and ruin your legs, plus the tiredness of the training is going to affect your swimming. If biking, getting through that distance, a 6-7 hour bike ride, which is most cases the big problem because of time and we all work, that is the most important thing. So it's your hierarchy of needs, where you need to spend most of your time. And I would also think about injury, age, and what is your goal? Why do you want to do the marathon? Is to try run a PB and do an Ironman? The way I would do it is do the Ironman and then do a 6-week block to a marathon. Hope you can still read that. Huge base. The marathon in an Ironman isn't as hard on the body. It's slower, your legs are fatigued. You've better fueled because it's a whole day event, you tapered. And then it's a 2-week active recovery. And then you've got a 6-week block of real specifics for the course. You don't need to do any long stuff. You just get a little bit faster, and all you have to do is focus on 4 runs a week, and you will absolutely run a really good race. If they're 2 weeks apart, you get a super compensation from the big event, and 2 weeks later, even if you just ticked over, you get a massive fitness boost. That's a good time to run a marathon, but you need to be fit, as in history of experience of years. Perhaps drop me a line and ask me, and I can help you as much as I can. Just do it through the comments. or reach out on email. And then it's about timing and what you want to achieve in that late autumn marathon. Hope you enjoyed that. See you on the next one.